Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Marianne Hensley. I am the Vice President of Media Operations here at FreightWaves, and we are happy to present today's webinar in partnership with Carggo. Carggo is a digital freight fulfillment platform that is leveling the playing field by bringing cutting-edge technology to logistics providers. The Carggo platform enables seamless communication and efficient operations, allowing companies to strengthen customer relationships and grow their business. Today's webinar will feature a discussion between two industry veterans around how freight brokerage can push past growth plateaus to reach the next level of success. We'll be hearing from Jenny Shi, CEO of Carggo, who is a visionary growth strategist with more than 15 years of strategy, business development, and finance experience across logistics and tech at companies like FreightWaves and Bridgestone. We're also going to be hearing from Dave Letourneau, who serves as Director of Partnerships for Carggo, where he's responsible for providing technology solutions for transportation businesses across the United States. Having started and operated a freight brokerage, he is directly aware of the challenges and opportunities within the industry, particularly for small to mid-sized 3PLs. We are excited to have both Jenny and Dave here with us today. In addition to our discussion, we'll also have a live Q&A with both speakers following the presentation, so feel free to submit your questions for them through the Q&A button in your Zoom control panel. Also, if you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to our team via the chat button in your control panel. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our moderator for today's discussion, JP Hampstead, who serves as Associate Editor for FreightWaves, covering freight markets, brokerage, and M&A news across the industry. JP, welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Marianne. And welcome to Jenny and Dave. I'm super excited to have this conversation. I think today and, in the market we're in now is a perfect time really to talk about growth challenges at 3PLs. Volumes aren't exactly booming. Rates are low, and yet the job market is really tight, and we see brokerages fighting over people. So I think, and at the same time, again, there are all of these new technologies coming out that present so many opportunities. So I think this is a perfect timely topic, and I'm excited to dig into it with you guys today. Jenny and Dave, what are the primary reasons, in your view, that keep freight brokerages from growing?
Hey, thanks, JP, and welcome, everyone. This is Jenny. I would actually say first thing first, right? So the managed transportation industry as a whole is one of the fast growing segments in the overall logistics in US. As you know, it grew over 20% last year and is still expected to grow at 5 times faster than GDP. So here, even though we're seeing maybe a little bit blip at this current moment, but certainly long-term trend and history has told us that the managed transportation industry is certainly growing, and we see continued growth. Now, very specifically for this segment, right, we call this the beginning to mid-stage brokers, there are lots of challenges, and we spoke to many of them on our daily basis. So I think I'll start, and Dave, feel free to chime in here. One, I think the reason that we hear quite a bit is, especially for newer brokers coming in, is casting the net too wide, right? So they make a lot of phone calls and sometimes lack of follow-ups, but oftentimes is lack of that niche that they can develop and present themselves and being top of mind. When that manufacturer's carrier called off the last minute, they can be that top of mind for that first time entering into that account. And then the second part of that is, they got to have to be proactive, land and expand after that. And a lot of times that we hear is, well, I know FTL well, but I'm not sure about LTL and others. And in this case, that we'll see that, find your own niche, but don't be afraid of partnering and get out there, make your customer at the center, think about how they buy, and prepare yourself as they enter into your land of opportunity. And I think that the second part of the growth is not all growth are equal. And sometimes we hear in our causes they're growing too fast without a proper operational support infrastructure that's in place. So that oftentimes later on very quickly will slow things down. So you have a huge spike, but then quickly slows down, or even sometimes take a step back. But in that same breath, we see that don't wait until you build that infrastructure in the team, right? You opened up the conversation here. The job market is tight, and trying to open a brokerage and grow the brokerage and hiring the people and all that around it. It takes time. So there's many productivity tools and any partners that's available out there. Quickly leverage them, build that. I would say the toolbox as full as possible, and switch them on and quickly as fast as you get out there and make that call and make that sell. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone. Really looking forward to this conversation for some time now. I'll just quickly introduce myself. As Marianne mentioned, I'm the Director of Partnerships here at Carggo, and essentially I talk to small to mid-sized brokerages all day, every day. And so some of the insights that I'll bring today are certainly secondhand. They're not necessarily all my own. So I've talked to you before. I appreciate it. Thanks in advance. But I do think, it's an interesting scenario that Jenny just described. We have this sort of outsourced 3PL brokerage market that is growing year over year. It's a growing industry, and yet many of the companies that I speak to every day are actually struggling to grow, right? And this is that long tail of the brokerage market. So companies that have maybe less than $50 million in revenue all the way down to startups. And these companies don't have the same luxury as the well-established heavy hitters that have well-funded. They can do things like engage in loss leading or contract on large opportunities and be okay with operating the loss for some time. And so I think it's a really interesting problem to solve is, hey, like the market's growing, but not everybody's being able to take advantage of that at this very moment, because small to medium-sized companies just don't have the same luxury. So they have to be a little bit more creative to grow their business. So I think we're going to talk a lot today about how, there's this theory that if you can streamline your operations on the back end, focus on essentially your core activity and streamline non-core activities. We can talk about those. Really helps empower your customer relationships and helps you grow your business. But I really do think that even before we get to that point of streamlining, and there's a lot of really simple, easy ways to do that, we should really focus on that customer interaction engagement. And I think this is a segment in particular for most companies, but especially the smaller ones, is having that coherent, well-managed customer communication strategy. And I think that's actually one of the reasons that's not always talked about, but really does prevent some companies from growing as quickly and as profitably as they could.
So a little bit of what I'm hearing from you is that brokerages should really specialize their people kind of before they need to. Like I could, small places when they're just getting started, maybe 10 to 15 to 20 brokers on the floor. Everyone does a little bit of everything. People are talking to customers. People are doing channel checks, communicating with drivers, doing administrative tasks, filling out paperwork, things like that. But what you're kind of saying with streamlining core and non-core is even before your people are getting overwhelmed, even before their performance starts dragging, it's better to let people do what they're good at and kind of specialize a little bit. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's what's changed in the last few years is that it's easier to do that, right? Before, I think, am in my conversations, it's soup to nuts brokerage, right? You're selling, you're tracking, you're billing, you're brokering, you're doing everything. And of course that still happens today, but it's a lot easier to, I think, partner. There are a lot of great vendors, whether it's technology, sort of operational partners that can help a smaller broker focus on that core activity, right? Which is, interacting with your customer, first of all, of course, negotiating on a load by load basis, or working on bids and contracts, and letting the other stuff go to the side. And I think, there's a lot of low hanging fruit out there, right? There's of course tracking, there's payment processing, there's document collection. There's the list goes on and on and on and on. And I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit out there where you can actually start your brokerage, if you're going to start right off the bat, highly specialized. And I think to Jenny's point as well earlier, it's focusing on that core function of moving the freight, strengthening that relationship, but also focusing perhaps on specific types of freight, obviously geography, really build an identity for yourself, because it certainly seems like the market's becoming more commoditized, especially for more transactional type shipping.
That makes a lot of sense. And earlier, you guys both alluded to this, kind of paradox in the industry, that it's growing really quickly, but it's made up of largely small companies. Yet there are, of course, we can think of like the mega brokers. We can think of a large number of mid-sized brokers, whether they're family owned or backed by private equity. And then of course, the long tail, as you said, of smaller brokers. Can you kind of outline how the challenges differ between like a startup broker versus a mid-sized broker?
Sure. Yeah. I think they're both really interesting challenges, but obviously very different. And so maybe start by talking about those startup brokers. And I have a ton of respect for them because I talk to them every day. And I think the first thing I'd say is sort of start with a little bit of caution, right? I think there are a lot of companies that will go out there, really individuals, and they might have a few great relationships. They might have been great operators at a previous, maybe larger organization, and they're ready to be entrepreneurial. But I think if you're going to start up a brokerage today, it means more than one or two good relationships. You should really have a Rolodex and feel very confident that you're going to have freight from the get-go, because it's tough out there, right? Being a new company with a new MC to get on board and really to have opportunities. So I think that's kind of the first caution flag that I always like to throw out there for the startup broker. But if you are feeling confident and you want to start a brokerage today, the first thing that I would do is take your brokering skills and apply them to vendor management, right? Before you even get started. And we're sort of talking about this specialization that you can have nowadays. You can really partner on and outsource almost all of your non-core activities, whether it's your, the software you're using, carrier onboarding, payment processing, tracking, factoring, EDI integrations, legal advice, accounting, right? There are just so many ways that you can work with, I think, some great providers out there, and that are easy to do. And I would just advise anybody who's, a startup, is to build those relationships before you get going. There are a lot of, like I said, a lot of great providers, and it might be more expensive at the get-go, some of these solutions, but it certainly lowers your executional risk of growing your business. And if we go to the mid-size companies, and I'm going to say mid-size, less than, let's say, call it less than $50 million, smaller to mid-size is different to everybody out there. But I would say that, these are different challenges, right? You probably have a strong customer base, a great operational team. You wouldn't get there otherwise. I think I'm going to take a bit of a contrarian view to say, as opposed to going out and sort of streamlining your back office, I would recommend actually, um, investing in a few really low cost tools at your company. And one of them, I think, is a CRM. There are a lot of there are free CRMs that you can use. Doesn't have to be fancy, but it's, systematically tracking your customer communication interaction. How often are you contacting them? Are there phone calls or are they emails? A proactive phone call goes a long ways, right? So I think these little things that you can do as a company without making really any investment at all, to focus on being able to scale that sales force, scale those customer interactions. Especially if, like you said, JP, you've got 20 people on the floor, everybody's having these customer interactions every day, but often you actually, as an operator, you might not have visibility into all of that. And so I highly recommend looking into this. It's a little bit outside of the scope of an operational framework, but it really does help, um, give you some visibility, right?
That's
Uh,
it's
Go
really
ahead.
interesting. One of the things that I hear a lot from the brokerages at, say $50 million, maybe just above that, is that, they started their own shop that because they were a great sales guy and they knew they could get some freight. They started getting some traction, trained some carrier reps, brought in maybe some of their friends or previous colleagues, people who knew they could sell. Pretty soon they've got five, six, seven, eight great salespeople, but they don't know how to develop their own great salespeople. They don't know how to train them. They don't know how to measure them. Everyone might be having a different strategy depending on how they were trained and where they came from. And I really think the point you're making about a CRM, so that you can actually measure what people are doing, measure their activity, keep track of your customer relationships, remind yourself of when to contact people. All of that, I think, is crucial to building a kind of a data driven sales training program.
Yeah, I agree. And like in logistics, we hear a lot about big data these days. Um, but I don't think it has to really be, if it's a small to medium sized company, it doesn't have to be big data. It just has to be simple, right? Like little things. When's the last time we called so and so and just thanked them for their business, right? Uh, those little things go a long way, and it's just really easy to do. So uh, yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. Obviously, we use it. We use those systems here at Carggo, and makes a big difference. I would also say on the communication front is like an internal communication tool. Again, it can be free, uh, where that you can use amongst your team members to talk off of email, right? Like if you're in a brokerage today, there are probably fewer phone calls than there were 2 or 3 years ago. There's a lot of email going back and forth. And we like to reserve that for sort of outbound customer communication, so that nothing gets missed. And it's easier to see, you get that visibility. And then on the flip side, for an internal team, you can communicate amongst each other. You can send emojis. You can send goofy memes, like whatever you want to do to make it fun to be at work. But I just think those are like the really simple things you can do before you even get into streamlining, the actual operations of your business.
Yeah, I think those kinds of tools are great. I mean, Coyote famously had Bark. Lots of people use Slack now for a similar kind of internal communication process. But going to the streamlining uh, piece you just mentioned, how can brokerages minimize time spent on sort of administrative tasks, or at least make sure that the people who are supposed to be selling have the time to sell, and the people who are supposed to be doing admin are focused on that?
Yeah, I think I think the answers are actually becoming more and more clear every day, just because there are some really great vendors out there. Um, I would say, start with the simple things, right? We like to look at tracking. There's a number of vendors out there that provide ways to track either using technology or perhaps outsourcing to a team that has lower cost, where you specialize on that tracking function. You can take it down to document collection. Again, there's plenty of digital tools that will integrate almost certainly with your TMS system uh, to collect documentation. Billing can be done automatically as well, right? And that payment processing can be done uh, in bulk functionality. Uh, so I think that's the low-hanging fruit that any good operator already knows, right? I mean, if you've got a mid-sized brokerage, you know this already. But I think the difference now is that it's much easier to implement these types of solutions, where you can really, when it comes down to it, just focus on moving that freight. I will say that those tools are only as good as how they're used. So especially with freight tracking, if you're using one of these tools, still having somebody who's responsible for escalating issues to the team, I think is a pretty smart thing to do. And if you think about the cost of a bump in the night, where there's an issue and you get a call there's nothing worse than getting a call from your customer telling you about a delay, right?
Right.
Goes a long way. That's a nightmare. I've had that in the past. Not very fun.
Yeah,
Um,
low hanging fruit. The other side of it is it's really managing your team, especially as you're growing and hiring. And a lot of these tools nowadays are just so much easier to transition or train. There's basically no training, no manual required. And back in the days, you still have to write what's your expense report process and all that. Now all that can be done through a simple outsourced tool. A lot of them are cheap or even free. I would say from the processing, the payment side, don't trying to do everything all at once, and that's something that we are really seeing a lot more from the conversations that we're having here with the small, especially startup brokers who's thinking about starting with one or two person. Really think about going back to our beginning conversation is specializing what they're great at, focusing on that effort, and then outsource to the tools, and using that human and machine interoperability is key here, right? The conversation Dave just started talking about, we have a lot of tracking tools that's available there. By having that, like the human and the machine that integrated there, there is still a call that expected, and there is still that human that's going to be there to maintain that relationship. That's really key, and that's where you build that trust and grow that book of business with that individual customer that you are, spent months and weeks trying to catch them down for giving you that first load, and how you really grow your relationship and your book of business.
I want to get a little bit into finance, which is always kind of difficult for freight brokers, just because of the payment cycles, sort of the differing durations between how you get paid by customers and when it's best to pay carriers. It kind of creates um, some difficulty. There's been such a trend, I think, in startups and tech companies lately about whether you call it the sharing economy or whether you think about converting fixed to variable cost. Even if you think about something like taking an Uber instead of owning a car, building a business inside of a WeWork instead of renting an office, or using some other kind of pay as you go software tool instead of um, you know buying like an on-premise application. I just wanted to ask you guys, because this is what you sort of help brokers do, is convert fixed costs to variable costs. So just tell me a little bit about where the best areas to attack are, and what that kind of what that opens up for brokers.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a great question. There's sort of mentioned earlier that there's converting fixed cost to variable costs if you're an existing business, or there's of course if you're starting up. I think just starting with variable costs is a great way to go. So whether it's working out of your basement or working out of a WeWork, where you can quickly turn on and off these expenses, is just really smart thing to do. You obviously can't get around, your insurance and your bond. Those are pretty fixed. But I would say that the simple things, JP, you sort of mentioned already. But why wouldn't I? Things like the uh, the monthly software fees. So not investing in hardware, right? These should almost always be software solutions if you're a broker that are in the cloud. Um, I really highly recommend any solution that has a per transaction fee. So really, you're not incurring that cost unless you're actually making money, which I think is a pretty compelling value proposition when you're living on margin and living on spread. Anything you can do to reduce those fixed costs, especially like times like today, where maybe in this moment of time there's a bit of a plateau in overall freight, where if you're not really making money, you're not spending it. I think where you can see a lot of benefits is actually outsourcing some of these functions to accounting, like the finance piece that you talked about. So being able to close the books, paying outside parties to do some of these things where you can hold them accountable for certain deliverables. It's still a variable cost, but it's also sometimes easier to manage outside parties than it is to manage people or operations that are actually within your business. So I think anywhere you can have variable costs that you can turn on and off at any time, monthly contracts instead of annual contracts. That way you can decide whether or not you want to make that expense each month, and you can turn it on and off.
Yeah, and going back, JP, I think you softballed us what we do here. So some of the customers that we talk to, one of the easier ways that we can be a simple and quick variable cost extension to their team is really as they're developing a new relationship, or like in this case, actually growing their existing relationship and finding there's additional coverage that they don't have, or additional expertise that they don't have at the current time. And as you said earlier, the labor market is really tight, and training and onboarding is just, it could be a wild card there as well. So in this case, go get the business and let the specialist, in this case, we help the customer quickly activate the contract that they were able to win and quickly start that fulfillment process for them right away, instead of trying to hire, train, and build that internal team that they needed to win that business and service at the level that they feel confident for their customer success.
Yeah, I mean, I hear this over and over again that, you know, brokerages that are growing fast, that are winning freight, they have they have pretty wasteful hiring processes a lot of times. They might, for example, want to hire young people who have never been in the industry before, because poaching people from other brokerages is, pretty expensive. And then of course you have to mesh their experience and their habits in with your existing company. So they go out, they hire a bunch of young people new to the industry, having no idea whether they're going to work out. Because I mean, let's be honest, covering freight is not for everybody. It's stressful. It can be lucrative. Usually not right when you first start. There's a lot of, sort of impatient experts on either side of the transaction, your customers and your carriers, and you have a lot to learn really quickly. And there's a lot of mistakes you can make. So I think they try to grow by having these kind of like standard hiring classes where they'll go out and they'll train 6 people, they'll train 8 people, and a third of them will be gone within 6 months just because the job wasn't what they thought it would be, or maybe you know for whatever reason the person um, moves on to a new opportunity. So I really kind of like what you guys do, which is basically just we will cover your freight and fulfill these loads on a per transaction fee. I mean, it makes so much sense because it's a sort of a riskless way to grow. And again, it's a variable cost instead of a fixed cost. But
Yeah, I think that the other part of that equation is really think about the customer success is really what you're aiming for here. That quick, hire and churn process in the other side of the impact is the distrust, the lost loads, and the lost relationships, and that's really expensive to recover. As we all know, this business, it takes a lot to earn that trust, and it took very little to sometimes just wipe it all clean. So that's really key about what we think about, especially in the startup and smaller end of the brokerage, which they do not usually have that capital, that rich financial attraction for even in the beginning of the hiring from the college student standpoint. So it is really interesting. We see a lot of entrepreneurial spirits coming in that quickly got burned because of that kind of practice that hurts not only their bottom line, but most importantly the reputation that's as they starting a business.
and kind of focusing on people here for a second. um when you go, say you do hire some people and they're quality and you think they've got what it takes, how do you kind of train them in such a way to put them in a position to really succeed?
Yeah, that's all human, right? Human is a very complex machine, as we like to say sometimes, because we really felt it all starts from this human here, regardless it is an industry veteran or it's somebody new you bring into this organization here, that you as the operator or the owner principal have certain identity, the culture, the history, the value that you are hiring for. So even for the veterans that you're hiring, there are a training and onboarding experience that is crucial for your success, but also for that individual who, starting a new career or switch a new life to joining your firm or your brokerage. It is all win-win if we can start the first day right. In Carggo, that we like to say that there's the first day premiere. It's like the movie that's starting to play. There's the first, very first screen, very first show is very important there. So we encourage folks to think about building again that streamlined process, the structures, the infrastructure that's already there. So you want to have that kind of a pre-built templates already existing, who what the culture is like here, and having a chance for everybody, not only you're at the hiring manager level, but also everyone on the team have a chance to meet and grade that individual to really bring in that culture, drinking the Kool-Aid, as we used to say. But also just going down to the nitty gritties. What is your customer interaction? What's your culture like? How do you speak to the customers? The answering phone call script, the email script, the response expectations that is set as you, the brokerage that you are so spend a lot of time build that trust in that book of business with. And on the day two or the ongoing side of things, we certainly see as a way of looking at ongoing communication. We talked quite a bit about communication early on, that there's that internal communication is key. We see a lot of company building that starting team is really crucial to know what is the metrics, how's everybody performing, where are they, and sometimes that you might not be in the same location. So investing in some low cost video conferencing, there's a lot of free Google, Zoom, free versions of them. Having that face to face, even though it's on the screen, is key to understand where the company goals are, how we ended the week, where are we going this week, what's our priority. And that is all, as a new hire, it's going to be key as they ingrain into what they think is the core and value of this brokerage that they just joined. And the other thing that I like, recently, one of our customers just shared that to me, especially during this slower times. Cross training is key here. We all know sometimes the coverage is thin. There's, kids sick. There's other events that happen that's not predictable, that we can't really plan around it, but that cross training during this slowing time, make sure that the employees are taking the ownership, cross train. And also this is a way to looking about niche or specialization. This is area that you can discover people's interest, where they like to go. And going back to, you want to hire, hiring is expensive, but keeping them around and keeping them grow, right, keeping them motivated is going to be much less expensive than go out and hire again.
I think that's a great point. I'm just going to add to that cross training piece, because I read the same article that our customer published, and I think especially now, right, things might be a little bit slower in the office. Cross training, maybe sending somebody to accounting, sending sales into operations, or vice versa. It can also get a little bit of empathy on the team, and you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I think, I guess the question here is hiring and training, but really it should be all about retaining, right?
Yep.
Once you get somebody on board, do they want to stay, and do they have that bond with the rest of their team members? So I think that's just a really great point.
That's fascinating, David, what you just mentioned about sort of cross training maybe during a lull in the freight market. I talked to a lot of recruiters, one, just because they have a lot of contacts, they know a lot of people. Two, because they always know, all the very interesting things that are happening inside of brokerages, and they can tell me about them. But one of the funny things that I've observed is that the recruiter's job always changes with the market. So, in 2018, when everyone, had more freight than they knew what to do with, and capacity was very tight, everyone was trying to hire carrier reps. And now this year, capacity is very loose, very easy to find a truck. Everyone is desperate for more volumes, and so everyone's trying to hire those, rainmaker enterprise salespeople. But if you have a little bit of foresight in your operation, why doesn't it make sense to train people to kind of slip between roles, and adjust with the market, so that you actually can build some flexibility into your labor force? I think that was a great point. The only other thing I wanted to ask you guys about, as far as training goes, is that, even just in Chattanooga, visiting different brokerages, but also talking to people in Chicago and, Arizona and Florida, there's such a wide variety of approaches to training new employees. Like everything from a 6-week freight academy in a classroom environment in front of a whiteboard with like vocabulary lists to like memorize, like literal school, to people being thrown onto the floor within a week and talking to truck drivers, and they don't really know what they're doing. But one of the things you guys emphasized so much was using technology to outsource functions and to variabilize costs. And I just wonder, when you get so much of the key to using tech to unlock productivity is using the technology correctly and using it efficiently. And I just wondered, how do you guys, even at Carggo, train people to use technology? Is that a big part of the onboarding process? Do you guys really just kind of pursue that thoughtfully? Like in the training process, how do you show people how the right way to use tools?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we actually, let me maybe speak from internal training here, like the softwares that we are using. We actually use our own proprietary software the training is really a click a button, because how we build it is thinking about if you need to use a menu, then something's broken here. So we really stress that using technology again, some of those guided, there are some software usage that you as an individual we use. You log in and there's guided steps to get you through what it expects you to click, where does it go, and explain to you how it works. That is included in our internal software that we use. So that takes a lot of the training of using the technology off of my plate or any of our internal operations team. In terms of how we use technology or other, we should be thinking about using technology to increase that velocity and efficiency of training. There's certainly a lot of other tools that you can add to it. I know that there's third parties can basically you can install almost a cookie on top of your browser that can guide you through certain steps, and that can be quickly drag and drop to instruction your internal team how they should be using it. Dave, any other thoughts from your?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is that I think we try to focus a lot on communication and those sort of internal communication tools. And so I think the simplest questions we get during onboarding is, who do I go to for this? How do I access that? So you can kind of very simply in a one page define who you need to go to. And sometimes that's a nice way to start your first day, is reaching out to people on the team and introducing yourself and sort of getting to know them, I suppose. So yeah, communication's a big part of onboarding.
And I guess moving to this, continuing the kind of the theme of technology, where do you see the future of technology in brokerage services? I mean, I feel like there are certain aspects that are maybe more mature than others. I think people kind of understand the major players in visibility. People understand some of the major players in digital freight brokerage, for example, or even digital freight forwarding. But there are a lot of other sectors or segments that are still kind of emerging. I mean, there's a lot of specialized freight that's still being tackled by technology. There's the TMS space still feels really wide open because so many of the large players are still on-prem, and I think kind of ripe for disruption. So I just wondered, like, where do you guys see the sort of the future trends happening? Where are the what spaces have yet to be really kind of shaken out and resolved?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a really. I wish I knew the exact answer, because that would be a good place to be. But I do think it's an interesting question, and if you let's just for a second fast forward 10 years and try to imagine what the industry looks like, and I think what we're seeing now, I still think we're in the early stages of this technology adoption, sort of within brokerage operations. So we see a lot of specialized vendors, right, who specialize on a certain function within even the operational process of booking a load. And I do think it's hard to imagine there not being some sort of consolidation of those services over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. I don't know which, and I don't know how or when, but I think you see those sorts of trends happen in other industries. And I think overall, for brokerages overall, an analogy that I've heard and kind of resonates with me is the travel industry. There used to be a lot of travel agents everywhere. You'd have to walk up and book your travel in store. There's a local branch in every single town, and eventually, there's consolidation. You see some major digital platforms, but these sort of travel agents still exist today, and they actually thrive. But they thrive in more like niche, specialized type of travel, right? So if you're going on a safari in Africa, you're not going to book it on kayak, right? Uh, you're still going to go to somebody you trust that has a whole bunch of value add services, who has relationships, and actually knows these details and nuances that are a little bit more complex. So I think overall in the brokerage industry, that's a trend that I think it's hard to imagine not happening. Is niche specialized providers thriving, who find a place for themselves in the market, and then I think consolidation in the more commoditized type of freight and logistics.
Yeah, I think taking just another step outside of freight just for a second, right? You know, a lot of us know technology adoption is faster. We feel it on our daily life. Just take it just not long ago, I think we had telephones. Was looking up the stats. It took decades to get telephones penetrated in 50% of US household. Decades, right? But it took less than 5 years for the smartphone to reach that penetration. In freight, there's a definitely faster adoption in terms of various technologies. Some Dave mentioned much more specialized. The TMS are still a lot to. There's a lot of opportunity. What we see here, there's always different case that require a special tool or special tech that can do that special thing. There's definitely more going to be looking at how do you integrate and better use different. You have a different knife for different occasion here, for a sushi plate or for a T-bone there. So that's kind of what I personally believe, that there will be more of how do you integrate different tool A, tool B, tool C, based on your niche, based on your own customer base, that you might require different type of integration. And that integration is going to be more ubiquitous than what we do today, the point to point. And even using that human as middleware today to integrate different types of technology. We use human to integrate technology tracking to another technology booking, right? So, so that is, we're playing that integration role here. A lot of times that the human do. And I certainly believe that will be a lot more advancement of how we think about the industry, better integrate with different tools for different use.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, it's, you can think of it as integration. You can think of it as platformization, where we go from companies that are just building a feature or a product to companies that are building a platform that multiple tools and experiences can be added to. That thanks for that. I know that we do have some questions for the audience, so I wanted to kind of let Mary Ann go ahead and moderate those.
Absolutely. And thank all of you so much for sharing your insights. I know that was super helpful for people in the audience based on the number of questions we've received so far. I will go ahead and dive into that. So, first question, what free CRM tools do you recommend? And do you have an opinion on Parade?
I can talk on the CRM side for sure. I don't know if I'm qualified to give an opinion on Parade, but I've heard great things. So, but on the CRM side, I think there's some the ones that I like. They're I'm sure you've heard of them. Salesforce, Zoho, HubSpot. The reason I like them is that they actually, and then we find especially useful, is they do integrate with your emails and your calendars. And I think at the introductory level, it's included. So you can essentially log your emails, track them, you can update calls and notes, but you don't actually have to retrain your team to go into an entire new system, because it does actually integrate with Outlook and G Suite, and that's pretty much all I think people use these days. So it's just a really easy way to get some metrics and to get some tracking without having to deal with change management across your entire company, right? It's very simple to implement, and you don't actually have to change their workflow. So I would recommend looking into those three.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jenny.
yeah, HubSpot, I think particularly have a free version, especially for somebody who's entering the business and want to start something like really bottom cheap. That's free.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And that is all of the time that we have for today. So I appreciate everyone for taking the time to listen in. Thank you to Carggo for partnering with us today on our presentation. And obviously, thank you to Jenny, Dave, and JP for sharing your insights and being here with us today as well. We appreciate your time and we hope you'll join us again for another webinar soon. Have a great afternoon.